In my large driveway, I have an area that the previous owners had a big burning bush growing, and it finally died due to the polar vortex a couple years back that killed a lot of bushes of that type. They're apparently susceptible to prolonged sub-zero temperatures. And I didn't want to just dig it up and cover it with blacktop. Plus, it had a pretty good root system and a stump that would be a pain in the butt to dig out. And I decided rather than make it look like an eyesore, I would just put a raised garden there. So that's what this video is about. I wanted the garden to be about 3 feet by 3 feet and about a foot tall. And the local Home Depot had some cedar boards in what they were calling 2 by 6 and 16 feet long. That means they're really about 1.5 inches thick by 5.5 inches wide, but they were 16 feet long, so I had them cut them into 8-foot lengths, and that would give me ample wood to make this raised garden. The first order of business was to rake away all the old red wood mulch that used to surround the base of the bush and just cover up the places where there was no asphalt in that part of the driveway. Then I used a hoe to make sure I was down to actual dirt. I couldn't go too deep because there was a big root cluster right under there and I didn't want to chop all those out, so I tried to find a happy medium between being just a little bit below the asphalt, the top of the asphalt, and where I'd start hitting the roots. I used my circular saw right out on the driveway to cut up the cedar planks for the 4 sides of the lower level of the planter, and then cut up a piece of the scrap to make 4 vertical posts which would receive the screws. The longest deck screws that the Home Depot had were 3 inches long, and I selected number 10. That seemed like a good size, and these were stainless steel, good for outdoors. And luckily they had them in the Torx or Star drive pattern. I couldn't remember if I had any T25 Torx drivers, so I bought this DeWalt one shown here in the drill. There seems to be no place on my asphalt driveway that's really flat, and to make sure I put this together on a reasonably flat surface, I just used my front concrete porch and started putting in the screws. I did use a drill in another drill that I had laying to the side to put the holes through the first plank and then only let the screws find their own thread into the vertical posts. This is what it looked like when I had the lower level all screwed together. Here's after the second level was screwed onto the vertical posts, and I had it sitting in here just like you can see it in the space I'd hoed out. I did put a bubble level on this and made sure it was level. The ground does slope a little bit there and in 2 directions, so I had to pack a little dirt for maybe 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch onto the necessary parts of the planter to get it up to level. Here's what the raised garden looked like once it was in position and ready to be filled. And then I added the new red wood mulch around the periphery of the raised garden to fill in the area up to where the asphalt stopped. I made it a raised garden for a few reasons. One is that it'll discourage some of the smaller critters like rabbits from getting into it so much, and also because it's in the middle of the driveway, it makes it easier to see so I don't actually back a car over it or something. And I also thought just a forlorn little patch in the middle of the driveway with some flowers in it would look kind of overwhelmed by the driveway. And finally, because the asphalt can get quite hot on hot summer days, and I thought it might overheat the nearby plants. Having it raised up a little bit might help a little bit in that regard. Of course, another principal reason for this being raised is that with the root bed of the old bush being right under the surface and not being all that practical to dig up without a lot of hassle and work, there was really no depth to the soil there where I could put in the root clusters of small flowers or other things. So it really did need to be raised for that reason as well. My past experience with my other raised gardens on my property, even ones made out of rot-resistant cedar wood, is that they do pretty well as long as the end grain doesn't point up. Any place where the end grain pointed up, it seemed to absorb a lot more water there and it couldn't dry out properly. And those areas tended to rot much quicker than the rest of it. So all of my other gardens have end caps over any vertical end grain to protect them in that regard. So the final step here was to make some end caps. I took a bit of the leftover scrap cedar planking and marked it out for the 4 caps. I used my bandsaw to do a quick trim, remove the excess wood and leaving only the part that was going to be used for those end caps. The 1.5 inch thick plank was really too thick for the end caps. I decided 3/4 inch would be good, so I used my bandsaw to resaw the plank down to 3/4 inch. Finally, the bandsaw was used to cut the resawn board into the 4 end cap sections. Those stainless steel screws I used for assembling the raised garden were too big for the end caps, so I had some leftover number 8 1 3/4 deck screws, which were just about the right size. And then I used 3 screws per end cap, one right at the corner and then one on each intersecting plank. And they nicely cover up the end grain of those vertical posts.